This week on the podcast, we cover some student loan news you need to know. Let's get started. Are your student loan payments or loan balances a major obstacle in your financial life? Then tune in and let's escape student loan debt. All right, welcome to another week and another version of episode of the Escape Student Loan Debt podcast. I will tell you, it is late at night when I'm recording this. I've had a very long day. We've recorded several other videos and podcasts today, and while I will always make sure I give you my best in terms of the information that I share, I don't have much desire to edit a long and extended podcast. So this is going to be a one-take episode. There's not going to be any cuts, not going to be any edits. So if you hear me flub my words, bear with me. It's like 10 o'clock at night, but I wanted to make sure I got you this information. Now, what are we covering in today's episode? There are several pieces of news when it comes to your federal student loans that are relevant, some of them more consequential than others. As I've shared in past episodes, we're in a kind of a big holding pattern with a lot of stuff when it comes to federal student loans, and each topic we're covering has this feel of, well, here's what we think is going to happen, but we're waiting on clarity from the Department of Education, or we're waiting on this from the court or that from the court. So I can't help that, but I can help how you position yourself while you wait, because I do think there are some things that you can be aware of, benefit from, or at least make sure that you're not snake bitten from because of lack of awareness. So I'm going to go through just some notes that I took. Again, very free flowing this episode, but I hope that you find it useful. What is one of the first things that we're going to cover? We're going to cover the fact that we are in essentially a period of public comment where all of the things we've been talking about over the past few months, the creation of the Repayment Assistance Plan, the removal of the ICR plan, the pay-as-you-earn plan, the SAVE plan, the limitations on graduate borrowing, the limitations on undergraduate borrowing, the restrictions on Parent Plus loans, all of those are going through a period where we're essentially waiting for those rules from the One Big Beautiful Bill Act to be finalized. And we've been waiting for the department to give more guidance on exactly how these things would be laid out if it goes according to their preference. So there's still some changes that could be made, but we have recently gotten the document that gives us the best chance of at least knowing, hey, here's what it's probably going to be. I'm going to put a link to that document in the show notes. Fair warning, it's like 400 pages. So there are some things that I'm going to mention that came out of this RISE committee, as they call themselves, that I think are useful. The first thing that came out of this committee, not the first, but one of the things that I think is very relevant, has to do with graduate and undergraduate borrowing limits. If you have someone who has significant federal student loans, it's highly likely that they use those loans for graduate school. I will say, if you are already in the midst of pursuing a degree, these limits do not apply to you. You don't have to worry about it. These are relevant to people who are pursuing degrees starting July 2026 or later. That makes it incredibly relevant if you're somebody who is considering going back to school to get an advanced degree. Maybe you have your master's and you're considering getting your PhD. You need to be very aware of these limits. It's also relevant for parents who are interested in sending their kids to school, potentially supporting them through graduate school, or knowing that their kids might take out loans to fund their graduate school, need to be acutely aware of these limits. So I'm going to start with the limits we've talked about in the past, where there are certain programs that are deemed professional programs, and those professional programs allow you to have up to $200,000 of student loans as your aggregate limit and $50,000 per year. Now, I say allow, that's an odd word to use because it used to be with Grad Plus loans, you could borrow whatever you needed for a graduate degree. So if you had a graduate program that cost $600,000, you could borrow up to $600,000. The Department of Education is saying that one of the ways that they're going to curb the increasing costs of higher education is just by limiting how much students can borrow. The thought being that if their students can't borrow as much, the schools will be forced to lower tuition. I think that's dumb as hell. I don't think it's going to work. But if anything, I think it's going to actually lead to less people enrolling. I think it's going to lead to a lot of schools closing in transparency, especially if you have private schools. But that being said, There are some schools that have reached the status of professional degree, and you're allowed to borrow the top of the top, which is $200,000. Those programs have been designated, and this is very odd to me, theology. So if you're pursuing a theology degree, you can borrow up to $200,000. If you are pursuing a med degree, dental degree, vet degree, that's something where you can borrow up to $200,000. Psychology, $200,000. An attorney, so if you're going to law school, if you're going to pharmaceutical school, chiropractic school, or school for podiatry, those are the programs that have been designated as professional programs where you can borrow up to $200,000. Now, there are also programs that are graduate degrees that you can borrow more than undergrad, but they haven't met the threshold of the $50,000 per year, $200,000 in total. These programs, you can borrow up to $20,500 per year at a max of $100,000. So those would be programs like an MBA program, a physical therapy program, a physician assistance program, a CRNA program, an RN program. If you are aware, there's a lot of dust up, understandably so, about the fact that nurses weren't designated as a professional program that can get up to the $200,000 limit. I don't think that all of these things are, a coincidence, but again, trying to stay apolitical as much as possible. These are programs where if you, for example, are pursuing a degree as a physician's assistant or a nurse anesthetist at a program that's really highly qualified but costs a lot of money, you may need to be aware that if you include cost of living, you may have to borrow more than you're able to borrow to get through that program, which would mean you'd be stuck with private student loans or just not going to that school or not pursuing that degree. But what I wouldn't want you to do is be unaware of those limits, accept a letter of acceptance at some school, and be stuck in year 3 or 4 with a limit on what you can borrow or not being able to borrow at all. Additionally, Parent Plus borrowers, if you're borrowing on behalf of a child, there are limits there as well. $20,000 can be borrowed per year per child with a limit of $65,000 per child in total. So those are the new Parent Plus limits of which you need to be aware. Also coming out of that RISE committee, something that is a positive is how they will view consolidated loans in terms of the credit that they're giving for the new loan that is established after the end of the process. This is one that we've covered on the podcast in past episodes. I've told you for the past few months to be very cautious about consolidating your student loans because prior to the Trump administration, like during the Biden administration, there was a period where they were really generous. And what they would do is they would take all of your consolidated loans and they would give your new loan credit towards forgiveness based on the most credit of the former loans. That's a mouthful, but let me explain. Let's say that you had 10 loans. 9 of those loans had 6 months credit towards forgiveness. One of those loans had 24 years and 11 months towards forgiveness. So you only had 1 month. You could consolidate those loans and all of the loans, the new consolidated loan would have 24 years, 11 months of credit. And I saw some people get their student loans forgiven because they had some rinky-dink loan out there that they owed like $9,000 but had a ton of credit. They consolidated it with $300,000 worth of medical school loans and used that loophole to get it forgiven much faster. Then they transitioned to a system where they took a weighted average of your credits towards forgiveness. The way that that worked is the loans that had the highest balances determined how much forgiveness credit the consolidated loan would receive. So for example, let's say in the scenario that we mentioned, you have a $9,000 loan that has 24 years, 11 months of credit. You consolidate it with a loan that's $300,000 and have 1 month of credit or has 1 month of credit. Your consolidated loan is going to be way closer to 1 month of credit than it is to 24 years, 11 months because the loan that had 1 month of credit had a much, much higher balance. Then we went to the Trump administration, which went back to the old rules, which said when you consolidate student loans, didn't matter how much credit you had on forgiveness before you consolidated, you started over at 0. Thankfully, out of the RISE committee, they are recommending going back to the weighted average system. So we don't have the option of going, hey, the loan with the most credit is the one that determines, but weighted average is much better than starting over. So we are still waiting for those rules to be finalized. So I would still tell you to proceed with caution because right now we're still under the old system. But if this is approved as written, it would be a radical improvement over what we are dealing with currently. Next up, they talked about joint consolidation loans or spousal consolidation loans. I'll tell you, I would be surprised if there's even anybody listening to this who has a spousal consolidation loan. There's like very few people in the country who have them. But if you're wondering what they are, there was a period of time where you could have a husband and wife, or I don't know if it was around during the time after the legalization of same-sex marriages, but you would have two partners in a relationship who could take their federal student loans and combine them together into a spousal consolidation loan. I see no reason why they would have ever done it, but some people did it. And the problem is it made for a hellacious process of applying things like forgiveness credits, applying for things like public service loan forgiveness, because how do you figure out who's getting credit for what, right? Like, am I getting credit on my loan based on the fact that my wife works at an eligible institution? It was a mess. So there was a process and has been a process where they're allowing people to separate their spousal consolidation loans. The problem is that after people have separated those loans, and there's a very small number of people who have successfully done it, they have not been credited based on the payments they already made. So for example, we have people in our community, one of the few who has these, where both they and their spouse are eligible to have their student loans forgiven under public service loan forgiveness. They had a spousal consolidation loan, they separated it, but when they separated it, they are now back at zero for public service loan forgiveness when they go check their credit. Every indication from the Department of Education, Biden administration, and Trump administration has said that when this is the case, they are eventually going to credit each of those people in the relationship based on the payments they made prior to it being separated. But there has been no indication as to when they would apply that credit. So we don't have any update on when they'll apply that credit, but we do have from the RISE committee a commitment that they believe that these people should have their loans credited based on the payments made prior to the separation. May not be a big deal to a lot of people out there, but I can tell you, for the people to whom it is relevant, it is extremely relevant to see them make that commitment that they are going to at some point apply that credit. There were some other things that are kind of deep cuts that we won't go into in too much detail, but there are some scenarios depending on the payment plan that you have, specifically for income-based repayment, where they are actually going to give you credit towards forgiveness for payments that could be made even while your loans are in default, as long as the payment that you make meets certain requirements. Also, some scenarios where even payments that are made while your wages are being garnished could potentially be counted. But I would like for there to be some more guidance or for those rules to be finalized before we go like deep down the well of what that might mean for a borrower. But those are some of the high-hitting items that came out of the RISE committee of which you need to be aware. There are also some updates outside of those RISE committee regulations that are helpful and things that could potentially impact your strategy for federal student loans. We talked about Parent Plus loans. I will remind you of some upcoming deadlines that are very, very crucial, especially for Parent Plus borrowers. You need to, if you are a Parent Plus borrower who wants to pursue either income-driven repayment plan forgiveness or public service loan forgiveness, make sure that your loans are positioned to do so before July 1st of this year. What does that mean? Well, the first thing is, if you borrow any more Parent Plus loans after July 1st, 2026, you will be cut off from income-driven repayment plan forgiveness and public service loan forgiveness. You'll have to pay off the loans in full. Again, this is another stupid thing that they are including that is incredibly punitive and is going to lead to less students being able to go to the school of their choice, less parents being able to financially afford to help their kids because now they don't have the option in their retirement years of at least negotiating a lower payment. But again, if you borrow any new Parent Plus loans after July 1st, 2026, you're iced out of that system. Bad phrase of words. You are shut out from that system. If you have student loans that are Parent Plus loans and you don't plan to borrow any new money before July 1st, 2026, you still have to make sure they're structured to pursue those programs. The way that you do so, if you've already done the double consolidation process, you're fine. If you haven't, then what you have to do in order to make your loans eligible is you have to consolidate them one time. You no longer have to do the double consolidation. You have to sign up for the income contingent repayment plan, and you have to make one payment on that plan, and you can then switch to the better income-based repayment plan, and you can pursue public service loan forgiveness. Doesn't make any sense. Very punitive because the income contingent repayment program has the highest payment by far of any of the available options. But right now, that's the process. If you haven't consolidated your Parent Plus loans, you consolidate them. And as a reminder, you can consolidate a single loan, as crazy as that sounds. Once you've consolidated it one time, you'll be eligible to sign up for income contingent repayment. After you've paid for a month, you can then apply to switch into another program, whether it be pay-as-you-earn, Repayment Assistance Plan, or income-based repayment, and lower that payment and then pursue forgiveness or public service loan forgiveness. Another update as it pertains to not just income contingent repayment, but pay-as-you-earn is that the Department of Education has started processing forgiveness under those two plans, which is a departure from how they've been handling it in previous months. As a result of all these court cases and the SAVE plan being deemed potentially illegal or unconstitutional or whatever the phrasing may be, the department took the stance that because the income contingent repayment and pay-as-you-earn plans were created in similar methods, that they couldn't legally process forgiveness under those plans either, which is not what the court said, but it was essentially what the department was using as cover. Now, they were taken to court over that, and the Department of Education had to admit in court that they were misinterpreting that law or that ruling, and that in actuality they do have the ability and in fact are required to process forgiveness for people who have met the threshold under those plans. So they have acknowledged that they have to do that. They have updated their systems apparently to be able to do that, and they have started processing forgiveness under income contingent repayment and pay-as-you-earn for those who are eligible. Because up to this point in recent months, it's just been people on IBR who have been forgiven. They did note, however, that based on some of those court filings and some of their systems, they are only able to process forgiveness right now for people on those plans who crossed the threshold for forgiveness before April of 2025. They are still working through, forget the reasoning and rationale why, but they're still working through how to cancel the loans for people who met their threshold for forgiveness April 2025 or later. But it is at least a good update to be able to say that under those two plans, you don't have to switch to IBR and wait to have it forgiven. You can stay right where you are if that's the right thing for you and be just fine. Now, if you're worried about taxes, because remember, starting this year, 2026, student loans that are forgiven under income-driven repayment plans are taxable again. Even if you're in the camp where you're waiting and they said they can't forgive your loans right now, as long as you crossed over the threshold of forgiveness before the end of 2025, you will still be able to have those loans forgiven free from federal income tax. I can't vouch for how your individual state will process it, but as long as you can prove, hey, I'm on the pay-as-you-earn plan, I technically received my, or paid my 250th or 300 payment, whatever it is, in this period of time, it doesn't matter how long it takes. Whenever they process it, it will be processed as it was forgiven in that year. And since it came before the deadline, you will be just fine. So those are some of the updates that I wanted you to be aware of. I know that there's no commercial break, no big breaks, no edits to this episode, but I hope it was still valuable to you. We are in a period where if there are no updates, I might drop in and say, hey, no updates this week. I'll see you again in 2 weeks. But our goal is to give you every couple of weeks something that you can use to have your student loans forgiven, reduced, reorganized, or expedited. I pray this got you a little bit closer to that objective, and I'll see you again in 2 weeks. From Escape Student Loan Debt, this was the Escape Student Loan Debt Podcast, a show for established professionals whose student loan payments or loan balances are impacting their marriage, their business, their credit, or their dream of achieving homeownership.